Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for joining today. Okay. As seen in many other webinars, you know the drill. We'll be talking about things that we do not have ready for shipping product just yet today. So please keep that in mind and don't make purchasing decisions based on what we're going to talk about today. So what we are going to talk about today is Charlie and I have been spending a gigantic portion of our time over the last several months sorting out what our steps are in the way of site drainage. So, and in this regard, it's mainly the idea of kind of connecting Civil 3D better to the analysis workflows that can be taking place in info drainage. And so that's a huge topic, and essentially we are trying to sort out where we start with that huge topic. So with that, we have some thoughts on specifically kind of where we want to start with that, and we were basically just kind of hoping to get your folks' feedback on this topic today. So this is all about pre versus post development flow rate and kind of what that workflow looks like. And so we are going to have a survey at the end of this that I'll kind of walk everybody through. But I mean, in that, once before we get there, basically was open to stop sharing so that Charlie can kind of walk us through what we're thinking. So Charlie, it's all you.
Okay. Okay, so yeah, I mean, I guess what we've been doing is looking at like a bunch of different options for maybe kind of the first initial workflow that we tackle. Pre versus post offsite flows is kind of what seems like would make the most sense, but I thought we'd go through some other ideas. Maybe all of them aren't really complete workflows though. Maybe they're all part of what we're calling pre versus post offsite. Talk a little bit kind of through some of these. And I guess what we want to do is kind of validate if like what we're suggesting is correct. If there's some things we're missing, if you guys have better ideas or any changes here. So not necessarily getting too detailed in any of these, but our first pass is just to kind of settle on where should we start, because like Tim said, there's a lot to do. A lot of these things would be required, but we need a place to start. So what we were thinking about here, to start with, kind of enabling the user to be able to analyze or compare their pre-development offsite flows to post-development offsite flows. I think something you're commonly doing in SSA or HydroFlow hydrographs or some other tool. And what we want to do is we're looking at workflows we can enable from Civil 3D integrated with info drainage analysis. So what we mean here is, you'd start in Civil 3D and be able to model this scenario and then run an analysis, which means you'd need to be able to design the storage elements for this to work. But you look at what your existing condition is, the runoff from your existing conditions might go in multiple locations. You might have multiple outfalls, and then be able to compare that to the offsite flows to your outfalls in the post-development or design phase. We already, of course, have pipes and structures, pipe networks, but we don't have anything in the way of storage elements, pond or underground storage, and the outlets to help design those, like orifices, weirs, outlet structures. I guess we'd have to be able to set all that up in Civil 3D for this to work. So at a real super high level, that's kind of what we're thinking here. And then other ideas we thought of. I can click. So, pond design, actually two of them here, pond design and underground storage design. These are certainly necessary for the other idea. Not sure if one of these is maybe an initial place to start, if it's really a complete workflow or not. It might not be without being able to analyze, everything through it. But maybe you're just kind of doing a quick calculator and getting a pond design based on a volume you already know and being able to grade it and see it in Civil 3D. Maybe that is valuable enough as a workflow and then as a step towards the pre-verse post analysis. We need either pond design or underground storage design. You need some sort of storage to get the other one to work. So we're kind of looking at both of these. Maybe they're a workflow that stands on their own, but maybe they're just part of the pre-verse post workflow. In either case, I think we'd have to start with one of these, underground storage or pond design. And one of the questions in the survey Tim's going to talk about kind of gets to which do you think is more valuable? So certainly for both of these, we have catchments that could be represent the flow to storage, although our catchments today are really rational method based. We'd need to open that up to other methods. But then designing the pond, both volume and what the outlets are, would be important. And for Civil 3D, getting that to grade into the rest of the site. And ideally, we already created some grading object for grading optimization to represent a pond and then be able to go grade it. I'm not saying that's necessarily the grading solution here, but I think if we have a pond, we want the pond to be just have one pond in Civil 3D that could be used in multiple ways. And then underground storage, and maybe this is more common for you, maybe less common than ponds. Certainly, if you're probably in an urban area or you're working on large box stores and the whole site's taken up by the parking lot, you're probably looking more at underground storage than ponds. If you're doing more roadway, highway work, maybe you have more room for ponds. So certainly we want to dig into kind of which of these we should start with. But, of course, this one too, we don't have anything in Civil 3D today really to represent this storage. And of course, we'll have questions. Are these individual objects kind of all parametrically tied together? How deep do we go with modeling these? And also, there's structures and with kind of the outlet element, inlet and outlet manifolds connecting these things. In the outlet, you'd have some sort of weir, orifice, some sort of control element to control how the water's leaving. All that would need to be part of what you set up in Civil 3D. And it probably needs to interact with the surface, either making sure it's set below whatever you put in for some cover below a surface. But where groundwater is probably plays an important role here too. So there's probably some minimum elevation you can actually set these at. And that might actually make you have to change your surface design. So some interaction there would be necessary, I think. So anyway, those are two that are maybe kind of something to start with on their own. Maybe they're just a part of the pre-verse post. And then I don't know if this is really its own little workflow by itself, but maybe being able to just kind of lay out a system for a parking lot design. Info Drainage has this deluge tool where you can kind of see all the low spots. You might be able to use that to kind of place inlets somehow, or at least guide the user to place them. And then certainly there's different types of storage that would be needed that could depend on the previous two items we talked about. If there's a pond adjacent to this, or if there's underground storage, or if there's, you know, something else. Some of these other ones might come a little later, like porous pavement, cells. But I guess the idea here, and this is just a rough, you know, thought of, you know, would this be an important place to start? This is kind of what we're trying to figure out. But kind of getting the system laid out, I guess, would be maybe the focus. And then still, I think, even for this, tying this into some pre versus post analysis would ultimately still be important. Channel sizing, we don't have really much of a concept of a channel in Civil 3D except modeling a corridor to represent one, but Civil 3D doesn't know it's a channel. It doesn't know any hydraulic properties of it. So we certainly could look at least, you know, being able to place a channel that Civil 3D knows is a channel, tell it maybe what the flow is, do some sort of quick analysis to size it. But that in itself, not sure that's really compelling unless we end up connecting this to the rest of the system. So still, you know, back to that pre versus post, you know, everything's maybe not going through pipes, and you need some flow to go through channels, swales or whatever. And you know, this still probably important even to be able to finish that pre versus post type of analysis. But again, here, you know, we're trying to see where to start. And, you know, do we start with being able to model a channel, being able to model the storage, like I mentioned before? That's what we're trying to figure out. Another maybe separate and different workflow would be pipe sizing. We have some pipe sizing tools in Civil 3D based on Federal Highway for the US and Rational Method. So maybe not very useful if you're outside the US. Probably most people on this call are in the US, though I know usually we get some people that are not. And maybe this is more important for them, being able to tie the Civil 3D pipe network to more global methods for pipe sizing. And even what we have in Civil 3D, Info Drainage has also just some sizing calculators and criteria that are a little more complex than what we have in this tool here, which is really, I think, just looking at like min and max velocity to do your sizing and the flow coming into the pipes, of course. And you can hold the outfall invert, set tailwater condition, but I think the Info Drainage calculator has some other capabilities of holding the slopes, or you know, matching crowns versus inverts, and you know, just a few more criteria to do some better initial sizing that we could leverage. So that might be separate from the other one, and maybe this one maybe goes along with that. This has been brought up a number of times for Civil 3D, just being able to auto place a pipe network along a corridor. We could do this in InfraWorks, so the image here actually is from InfraWorks, but we never got to doing that for the corridor, we could line it up with certain feature lines along the corridor to place the inlets, but also leverage analysis for spacing of the inlets like we do in InfoWorks. And in InfoWorks, again, we're using federal highway and rational method, and we could certainly open this up to other methods. And for drainage, I think having specific methods for like France and Australia, UK. So potentially again go beyond what we have just for US methods. And maybe this in the previous one, we do one first and then the other and kind of work the two together as an option. Culvert analysis. Again, something we can do in InfoWorks, but not in Civil 3D, not specific analysis for, like based on federal highway and looking at your entrance and exit losses. We don't have any of that in the Analyze Gravity Network command. It's totally separate analysis. So this would look more at analyzing and sizing specifically culverts. Of course, we need multi-barrel support because a lot of times culverts have multiple barrels for them. And even actually this, maybe some comments in the chat or something, if multi-barrel support is important also for just storm networks, or if that's mainly important for you for culverts. I know I've seen some cases where, maybe you can't have too big of a pipe size in a storm network, so you end up putting multiple barrels. Doesn't seem as common, but maybe something still that's necessary for some of you. I forget, Tim, if we had a question on that in the survey. I
don't think we did, Charlie.
Yeah, so maybe some comments in the chat would help there. And then green infrastructure. Info drainage can handle a lot of these like LID type elements and be able to do some initial water quality volumes or first flush just to make sure you have the right amount of LID elements, and then also specify some pollutant removal methods to make sure that you're removing the right amount based on the LID elements you have. And of course, route this through the rest of the system. And, some of these include storage, porous pavement, volume underneath the pavement can certainly have an impact on your post-development flows. Some of the other ones maybe aren't quite designed for storage, but still route the whole system through all these elements. So not sure if this is certainly a gap we have even with SSA. So if this is needed, maybe this is more important to some people. It's maybe not as regulated or required in most cases, unless it seems like maybe at the municipal level it's starting to be a requirement, but at the state level certainly recommended. But I don't know if there's certain requirements requiring you to use these or not. So anyway, yeah, I mean, comments on how important this is, if it is or not, would be helpful. And then sanitary sewer networks, I didn't put a lot into this one, but something you can do now with info drainage, maybe this is important for some people. I think a lot of people maybe are just using spreadsheets, so we weren't thinking this is where we would start, but I just figured I'd throw it on here as an option. Maybe for some of you it is important. And I think that's all we really had. If there's something we missed. There's a gap that we have currently that you think is a higher priority we should be looking at. Definitely let us know. Actually, I think there is a question for that in the survey, so you could fill in some information there. And then, so going back to this, I mean, this is currently what we're thinking internally as the right place to start. And I say start, but even just to do this, we're going to need to start with having some sort of storage element, either surface or underground, or maybe both before this is even realistically possible. But we could probably have it work with one or the other. So we definitely want your input on, where we should start here. And another thing that's kind of come up as we talk about this too, is the whole idea of like macro level versus micro level. And actually we have a couple of questions in the survey. So just to touch on what we're kind of getting at there. These probably aren't the best images for this, but I think in talking to a number of customers, people are using a different method for sizing pipes than they are for doing your storage volumes. The rational method is more conservative and typically used for pipe sizing, but it's not appropriate for volume. So usually, at least in the US, an SCS tier 20 or tier 55 is typically used for storage. You could use modified rational, but some other method is typically used for doing the storage design and ultimately analyzing if you're reducing your peak post runoff from your existing pre-development runoff flows. But you don't use that for your pipe sizing. So people today are probably using either two different tools. I know some people are, maybe they're using SSA or hydrographs for what we're calling the macro level on a pre-verse post analysis, where macro level, you're kind of looking at kind of everything that's flowing to those elements, not each individual inlet that you do in the micro level for your pipe design. So the idea here today might be that all your individual catchments to each inlet at the micro level, all of those inlets that flow to the same downstream element at the macro level might all be combined into one catchment for the purpose of that analysis. So one of the questions on the survey is kind of trying to get to how important it is to continue to separate those, or if we're using one tool and one model and the model is linked directly to analysis, is it still important that you kind of at the macro level design separate reaches from your pipes? Certainly in the past, that's what you probably would do, because every time your pipes changed, you don't want to go back and rerun your pre-verse post. But I think what we're looking at here is maybe trying to find a way where the model is directly linked to analysis, and maybe even you go and run it and it does the rational and the storage analysis at the same time, and comes back and gives you your pipe sizing based on rational, but your storage stuff based on some SES method or something else. But using the actual pipes as each individual reach element for that macro level. So basically what we're getting at is, and there's a question on it, just your feedback. Do we need to think about a way to have separate reaches that just represent the macro level flow, even though pipes are already in the drawing representing those locations. Maybe early on they're not. I mean, all you have is reaches, but I'm thinking once you design the pipes, do you still want to continue with some separate network for the macro level? So anyway, I don't know if that helped or whatever, what kind of we're getting at on a couple of those questions, but at least wanted to cover that. So yeah, and just kind of these are the things we listed out. And again, if we miss something, let us know. But we definitely like your feedback in the survey. So
what? Yeah, maybe I'll drop the survey link into the chat. And then maybe while folks are, tell you what, why don't we, before I hit send on the survey link, there are a bunch of questions, Charlie. No surprise. I've been doing my best to keep up with them, but there are a handful of others that I think we should probably kind of touch on. Let's see here. Maybe if I kind of go from the top here. Tony had a question about doing underground storage right now. Would basically info drainage, would it be somewhat similar to either Contact or ADS software design? I'm not familiar with either of those, but maybe you are, Charlie.
Well, those tools give you, if you know the volume you want, right, those tools will give you how many chambers you need. I think that's definitely would need to be a part of this, but I think what we want to do is route the storm through them and see what impact that has on the downstream flows, and ultimately at your outfall. Are you reducing or at least not exceeding your downstream flows at the outfalls? I'm not sure those tools really do that. Certainly not in an integrated way with the rest of your system. I think they're more just getting the right volume if you know the volume you need, right? So maybe a little different, but to some degree, you know, even the info drainage tool, it's probably a similar setup, right? You got to tell how many chambers and what the layout is, and you know, those tools kind of do this for you too, right? So there probably is a little bit of overlap. Might even be nice if we could just take their results directly and just plug it in here, but I don't know. It probably doesn't take too much to fill this in either. So,
couple comments here. It'd be nice to have a structure type called control structure that would have an orifice, weir, etc. Understood.
Yeah, I agree there.
Underground storage and even ponds also need to have pipe network coordination, not just to the surface. Absolutely agree. Let's see here. Can the deluge tool be dynamically linked to the surface so that low spots are always displayed? And is there potential for info drainage in combination of the deluge tool to provide a best or recommended design path to route or reroute stormwater?
Yeah, so here, don't get rid of
I'm not
it yet. I just wanna, so right now I don't know if it's dynamically linked or if you just run it. Yeah, probably right now it's probably not dynamically linked. I think where we're going though, the surface might be more dynamically linked even to info drainage, certainly to civil 3D here, right? So if we had the tool, we could probably certainly do it in a more dynamic way. Right now, I'm pretty sure that in info drainage is not dynamically linked, certainly not to the surface it's in civil. And yeah, I think kind of the second question on this, is the potential for info drainage in combination with the Taylor's tool to provide the best or recommended design path. Yeah, that's kind of what I was getting at, I guess, in this one, maybe, is leveraging that tool to maybe help with this. So it definitely potential. Again, these are just ideas, so we haven't really gone through and thought out how all that would work, but that's the idea here, is to figure out if that would be a key workflow that we could focus on. So I don't know
let's see. Sometimes use pipe system dumping into channels that then dump into a detention pond. So you really need everything to connect to a design with drainage data. So yeah. Totally. Yeah.
So maybe some comments on that. If does that mean, I totally agree, right? A lot of systems are going to need all of that. Does that mean we can't release something first that just has like a pond? Does that still have value, or do we really need the whole, ponds, underground storage, channels, really, for it to have any value? So kind of a question. Let us know what you think.
Do we know if info drainage has options to include a dissipator block at head walls to reduce outflow?
I don't think it does right now. I'm not entirely sure though. Yeah, I mean, so if we do something from Civil 3D, if that's the direction we go in, like focusing on culverts, we can certainly consider that type of stuff for losses.
Basically, it just looks like a comment. Water quality capture volume is calculated in a separate spreadsheet, and those results drive the pond weir orifice design separately.
Yeah, I think that's pretty common to a lot of areas. Info drainage does have some calculators, but and they're based on either a first flush or a required water quality volume. So they're probably similar to a lot of, like, in the US state requirements, but I haven't looked too deeply if they give you exactly the same. And I know some states, like I used to work in Massachusetts, they had separate spreadsheet that you'd fill out anyway. So certain special form. So, I don't know. It's maybe just those things in info drainage are really just a calculator. Again, kind of like your comment is here, just to get you what you need. And then ultimately what you're doing is routing the whole storm through the whole system.
Big issue with drainage design in Civil 3D is the inability to have a blind connection to sewer networks. Just a comment.
Okay.
Let's see, Steve, there are multiple options for flood storage with release either by an outlet pipe or an infiltration into the ground. Generalized tool for analysis of how much storage we might need at a point on site with options for discharge method and rate would be a great start before I start designing.
Okay, so looking more at, just you said flood storage, so looking at like using the parking lot as storage, is that what that's getting at, in addition to any actual storage elements? Well, yeah, I mean, anyway, in any case, good point, thank you.
John saying need to have control over cross-section shapes and dimensions for underground storage, round, rectangular, arc, semicircle, so on. Agreed.
Yeah, and you see this being some parametric content or more off the shelf type of, like contact, storm tech models that you'd pick, or a mix of both.
And what's the priority, I guess?
Yeah. I think we have a couple questions in the survey related to those, so I think you can add comments.
Let's see, bypass links necessary are pain, so it would be good to have the ability to show ponding and bypass on an inlet by inlet basis. Basically, where does the water go if it doesn't make it to the inlet? So we add those properties. I think we have the properties. I don't know if we have the properties on the structure now. Anyway, we need that sort of data and right, some visual representation as well, with info drainage too, and the analysis that could even doesn't need to necessarily, I guess, go to another inlet, but could go overland. So combining 1D and 2D, which we don't have the capability in SSA, but I think we would with the analysis tools we have with info drainage. Would underground storage be shown as in pipe network parts? So, I mean, I think the goal is to have like underground storage be discrete objects that would connect to and have an awareness of the pipe network. So it's not like a storage, like a tank wouldn't be like a structure in a pipe network, right?
I think this is all something we want to figure out. Should these be similar types of content, or maybe a whole new type of parametric content? But I think you'd probably want to know the individual elements for quantifying, cutting sections through it and all that. Probably would helpful to have some sort of content object for that, or not. Let us know what you think.
Let's see, for clarity, thinking the surface isn't just a plane, but made of various surface treatments, as well as strata.
Yeah, good point. And we definitely have the opportunity here. I mean, the grading elements we're looking at themselves have different layers, and certainly the ground around them does too. And so there's potentially something we need to do. You're grading a pond and there's some infiltration materials beneath it, but there's also some layers of topsoil kind of that are getting filled in on the side slopes, and we need to consider all that.
John saying only small open sites can really get away with a pond. Fair enough.
Open sites, yeah. Ooh, what is pond GIS? Green infrastructure. I don't know what that's standing for. Green infrastructure stormwater management, maybe.
Could be. GISWM, not GISWM.
Oh. Yeah.
Okay. Can you do all your storm and drainage analysis within info drainage, or do you need info drainage ultimate?
You can do all your stormwater drainage analysis within info drainage. What info drainage ultimate adds right now is a connection to Civil 3D. So to be able to start your pipes and structures over directly into info drainage, and then be able to bring back some representation of ponds, storage, channels, you can bring that back into Civil 3D with Ultimate. So Ultimate really adds a Civil 3D toolbar. Might be a couple other small things it adds too, but that's the main thing it adds. But you can do all the analysis just as a standalone tool inside InfoDrainage.
RC saying we usually submit calcs for individual parts of the drainage model, water quality, existing runoff pipes, storage, etc. Is the idea to have the software spit out one report with everything as opposed to what they do currently?
Yeah, ultimately, and I think that's what you can do now in InfoDrain, and just choose which parts you want in the report. It's not as individual, I guess, as we have in our other tools. There's certainly a lot more flexibility for the reporting today in InfoDrainage, and I think we want to leverage that for what we do here. Of course, we're talking today really about how we start off and what our first increment is. So you might not have the whole thing right away, at least not from this, but with InfoDrainage, I think you could get it.
We have a bunch of questions about kind of how the services are going to be offered. So, I mean, between a bunch of questions about whether InfoDrainage was going to be included in the AEC collection, or how like cloud services will be charged, and two kind of comments on that. Those decisions really haven't even been made yet, I don't think. And then, I mean, when those decisions are made, I think those are kind of above Charlie and my pay grade. So I'm afraid I don't have like a really solid answer for those issues right now. Lint is asking if these things, I assume the like additional entity types, will be IFC compliant from the jump. Great question. I mean, I suppose it totally depends on whether all these are included in the IFC schema. Then we'll definitely want to make sure that we have them compliant, because we're doing a lot of great work on IFC and making sure that Civil 3D can import and export with IFC. So let's see. John saying it would be useful to cut sections and details that show all the storage components. Absolutely agree. And that's definitely that's the goal. Sounds like we're after discrete object model, much like an MEP model, where each element is modeled. And does this require an existing surface or other hosts so elements aren't floating in space? So yeah, I mean, for a lot of these objects, I mean, they'll definitely have to kind of have an awareness of the surface in Civil 3D for sure, as well as an awareness of the other elements in the pipe network and the drainage model. So yeah, I mean, we're looking to do this in Civil 3D. I don't think we want things just floating in space. Swales should tie into the surface, ponds should tie into the surface. Even underground storage should know where it is beneath the surface. So, yeah. Mike saying trying to make this stuff out of pipe network parts in Part Builder or Inventor would be extremely difficult. An inbuilt parametric content builder like the family editor in Revit would be an awesome for this and other uses. Wasn't there some consideration for a generic parametric object in the past? Yep.
Yeah, it's definitely still under consideration, right? So, and if it's needed for this, maybe this pushes that further along too. Certainly, yeah, other reasons why we need to do that.
John, reporting, hydroflow reporting is the best, but lacking customization tools. SSA reporting is horrible from a municipal engineer's perspective. Fair enough. So I guess with that, I mean, maybe we can kind of walk through the survey at this point then. So
Yep.
at this point, why don't
I'll stop sharing.
I will hit send. Okay, so in the chat, you should have a link to this survey. And then if I get this over on my correct screen and I share my screen. Okay, hopefully my survey is being shared now.
Yes.
Cool. So I don't know, Charlie, do you want to walk through this or do you want me to, or I don't know if it makes a difference, really?
Yeah. You could start if you have, I wasn't planning to, so I didn't.
Hopefully these are fairly self-explanatory questions, but I mean, first, just what's your role in the typical site development process? Are you a one-person band that does the entire site, including the drainage? Are you a drainage specialist that works as part of a team of other specialists? With that, are you a specialist that doesn't concentrate on drainage, but you're more focused on like the design of the surface or the roads or something like that, or other? Basically one of the real goals we're trying to get at here is we want to know like your rating of the value of this whole pre versus post development offsite flow rate. As I mean, is this a good first workflow to integrate civil 3D and info drainage? Just overall, is this a valuable place to start? If we have this as a first increment, how valuable would that be? And then if not, what would be? If you have another workflow that would be more valuable than pre versus post, let us know. Again, this gets into which of the following do you use more frequently in your drainage designs as far as storage is concerned? Is it ponds or underground? And then kind of along that, kind of following onto that. So other than the storage elements, what are the other elements that would be absolutely critical to a pre versus post development workflow? Let's see here. So beyond that, if you could rate the importance of having catchments as a reference to be consumed in other drawings, this might be, think about this. I mean, first kind of thing that people would think of is, would it be useful to have catchments as derefs? So is that something that would be absolutely critical in this workflow? Super important versus not important at all. Next one here is, could the micro level pipe network be used for the reaches in the macro level analysis if they were directly used in both analyses? Yes, no, or do you not care? And I don't know if Charlie, you want to clarify this at all? Or
That's what I was trying to get at with that last slide, right? Just I think today maybe a lot of people they're doing separate analysis, so they're doing a macro level catchment instead of all the individual catchments to the pipes when they do the storage. I guess we're wondering how important it is to continue that type of workflow, or if everything's in the model anyway, can we just get by with using each of the individual pipes as reaches? Maybe there's regulatory reasons why not to, or some other reasons. I know one thing brought up was that people do that just because they don't want to change the storage design flows just because, you know, you change a pipe slope or something. But if it's all the same model today, that might not matter as much.
Yep.
And then I guess this one was related, right? If you say no, it's not, so no to the previous one, like it's not okay to use the pipes for both, then just kind of an open question here, just to find out what you expect to see the reaches, kind of how you'd like to see modeling those, how they be represented in Civil 3D, and how you'd expect those to sync with those macro level. Like, should you have all these catchments to your pipes? Is there some overall catchment that's kind of the macro level representing all those and they're linked together? Or do you want to just lay those out separately? Just kind of an open-ended question here, what you're expecting or would like to see.
Yeah. Then the last one, super open-ended. I mean, if you have any other feedback on this whole workflow as a first increment to connect Civil 3D and info drainage, just let us know. Gotten a lot of feedback so far on this just from the Q&A panel, but one more that's floating in the Q&A panel here. So RC is asking, would this utilize parcels for drainage nodes in a sense?
I mean, so we haven't really done any, we're trying to figure out the workflow to focus on first, and then we'll dive into details. We certainly have the catchment object now, so I'd imagine we're continuing with the catchment, but maybe there are improvements to the catchment that are needed so it acts more like parcels. Certainly that was kind of the hope years ago when catchments was that maybe you could break it. I assume this is what you're getting at, is because parcels have the ability, if you have your soil and your ground cover, you can break those up into smaller areas to quickly get your runoff and curve numbers based on those inside catchment, which catchment tool doesn't do, but I know people use either parcels for that or maybe a map 3D workflow or something. So yeah, I mean, we'll have to get into details on how that would work if this is where we start to dive deeper.
All right. So I think that's what we really wanted to talk about today. This is certainly not the last time that we'll be talking about this with you folks. As we kind of mentioned, we've got a whole lot of work to do on this, so we'll be checking in with you folks on the regular as we get into things. So, but yeah, that's I think what we want to cover. Charlie, any closing thoughts or?
No, thank you. Yeah.
All right.
Look forward to looking at the results of the survey.
Definitely. All right, cool. Well, thanks, Charlie. And I guess we'll wrap things up today. So thanks everybody for all the great feedback today, and we'll catch you next time.
Bye, everyone.
Everybody.